Hello, everybody. I'm going to give an update on the workings of the EWG, which is the group that develops the community-based version of OFED. If I can get it to forward the slide. Let's try again here. Well, I can't get the clicker to work. Is it this one? Okay. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the charter of the EWG group. I'll go a little bit through the process that we use to develop the OFED packages. I will give a kind of a retrospective of the work that we've done in the last year, and then a little bit of discussion on where we see things going forward, and then discuss how people can get involved and contribute. So the charter of the EWG group, which was formed at the very beginning of OpenFabrics, was to develop a enterprise-ready, hardened distributions of the OpenFabrics code base that was being developed by all of the various different maintainers, harden it, and provide packages that could run on off-the-shelf Linux distributions. And the purpose of the OFED package is, it can be used for several different purposes. One is it could be used, completely or in part to help enable the Linux distributions. So, Red Hat picks up the various user packages individually and the kernel code from kernel.org. Same, John Jolly does similar things for SUSE. And it can also be then used directly by customers that want to run on various Linux distributions, but perhaps the community version of the OFED code has a bug fix or a new package that hasn't yet been included in the distros. We can also use this package, and it's also used by several of the vendors as kind of the core package where they take that core OFED code base, but they may add additional features and things like that and produce a custom version of OFED. MoFED is a example of that. The Intel TrueScale team takes a version of the open source version of OFED and does a derivative that they release with TrueScale. For the OmniPath, things are slightly different at this point, but they once they get upstream, then they can be included in the OFED package. And it's also the basis for the code base that's used in the interoperability testing lab. This is kind of pretty important. So the UNHIL group and the testing lab actually helps us a lot in the development and testing of OFED. So that as OFED is being developed, they'll take the early RCs and packages and they'll run it through the testing lab, make sure that we have interoperability between various types of hardware that are InfiniBand devices or Rocky devices or iWarp devices. And a lot of times they'll actually, the interop program has debug events and then they have logo events. So a lot of times in the debug events, they'll use the early versions or the RCs of the community OFED for doing the debug events. And then if a vendor finds an interoperability problem prior to the OFED release, they can get that interoperability fix put into the production OFED, and then the production OFED is the one that's used for the logo program. And then Rupert tells me that they also use the OFED package as part of the IBTA interoperability testing events. So the process that we use, and it hasn't really changed over the last year. Every year we kind of look at it and review it and see if we want to do things different. And over the years we have done some major changes. I believe, Christoph was mentioning that, early on we had a process where, in the 1541 timeframe, where the developers would develop the code and they would first get it into the community OFED, and then sometimes later on they would try to get it upstream into the Linux kernel. And this was probably, it's been several years, maybe 5 years ago, and we ran into situations where the Linux distros were actually picking up the upstream code and not just using what was in OFED, and we had a divergence because there were things that were in the OFED packets that weren't yet upstream, and there was even instances of interoperability problems because of differences in the live IB verbs, and so we saw that to be a problem. So the way that the process works is that the various developers, whether they're kernel developers or user developers, they'll develop code. We use the open source process. They're very similar to kernel.org. We have the Linux RDMA mailing list, and so they'll submit the patches up to Linux RDMA. They get reviewed, and then for the kernel code, it gets sent upstream eventually to kernel.org. And then when we go to develop an OFED package, we base it on the upstream kernel code. So this is very important. It's a difference than what we used to do years ago, where we would get things into OFED and then get them upstream. And for the user space packages, basically OpenFabrics is the upstream community. So people that are maintainers of those packages actually develop and release individual packages, and then we gather up all of those packages and put them into the OFED release, and then we add backports for various important Linux distributions, primarily Red Hat and SLES, and the derivatives of those like CentOS. And then we do have the ability to add some things that are not yet upstream that are experimental. We only have one case of this today. It's some Xeon Phi peer-to-peer support, which is in the OFED package, but as an experimental feature, not enabled by default, that people can use. And then we do sometimes cherry pick bug fixes from newer upstream kernels. So if we're based on, like a 3.18 kernel, which is where we are now, and there's been some bug fixes that have been fixed upstream, we have the ability to cherry pick those back. And then we package it all together with install scripts, release notes, etc., and release the tarballs in RC form. And then once all of the bugs have been resolved, we do a final release. That's the process. Okay, so some of the things that we've done over the last year, I think it was very close to the workshop last year. We were just finishing up the 3.18 kernel. The other important thing to note is you can tell which kernel.org kernel OFED was based upon by the OFED release number. So 3.18 corresponds to the 3.18 kernel.org kernel. And in that release, we also added support, in addition to the ones we had before, some of the Red Hat 6 series and SLES 11 series. We added support for the Red Hat 7.1. We did pull in the OFI 1.0 live fabric package. That was one of the big features. And then the Mellanox ConnectX-4, the driver code had already been kind of pre-staged in the upstream, so it was ConnectX-4 ready at 3.18, even though the ConnectX-4, I believe at that point, wasn't fully released by Mellanox. And then there's the list of all of the various user space packages that had been updated for the 3.18. Okay, and so then we've done a couple of we've done one update, and we're working on an additional update to 3.18-1, or to 3.18. The first one was 3.18-1, and the primary driving factor for that was to add support for some new dot releases of the Linux distros. The Red Hat 6.7 SLES 11 SP4 were added in OFED 3.18-1. We picked up new user space packages for the live fabric and a whole bunch of other ones, and then bug fixes. And we're currently working on OFED 3.18-2 with the primary driving factors were to add support for Red Hat 7.2 and SLES 12 SP1, and we're getting fairly close to being able to put out an RC on that. We're still doing daily builds. I believe the last backport for Red Hat 7.2 was pulled in for the NFS RDMA last week, so hopefully we're getting pretty close to that. And then we're also updating various user space packages. I didn't provide the exact list here because it's still changing a little bit. One thing is that if people join the email list and get the announcements for the meetings, There's always there's a rolling set of files that Rupert maintains that gives the current list of all of the kind of released versions of the user space packages, and then also the various bug lists that we're working through. And so we hope to wrap that up, within the next month or so. And then going forward, we've been trying to figure out which kernel to target next. And traditionally, what we do is, we usually bump to a newer kernel about once a year has been the cadence. And what usually drives it is that we get together in the meetings and all the vendors say, well, I've got new stuff that's, tentatively planned for kernel X or kernel Y, and we kind of wait until there's a big enough set of stuff that everybody believes that it's worth, jumping to the new kernel, because every time we jump to the new kernel, we have to re-backport to all the various different distros that people want to support. So some of the things that people have been interested in that have been working their way through the list, and there's actually a ton of activity going on the list these days. There's the Rocky V2 stuff, which I believe did get into the 4.6 kernel. There's been a lot of work on this new OmniPath driver. There's a new Intel iWarp driver. There's been a lot of updates happening to the SRP and ISR targets and NFS RDMA. There's been a bunch of additions to IP over IB. There's some additional things that are they're still being discussed on the list and have just recently been submitted that we could also consider. There's this SE Linux support that was discussed at the workshop here. There's been a patch set that's been bouncing around for a while on this C group stuff. I wasn't quite sure what that was for, but now I know after the session the other day, it was part of this use case for RDMA containers. So we were thinking, should we target 4.6 or should we wait till 4.7? In the last meeting, we're probably going to wait till at least 4.7. There are some additional features. Vlad from Mellanox said that the Mellanox people want to make sure are in, and those won't be in until 4.7, probably like the SE Linux stuff and some other things. So then, we'll want to support the latest Red Hat 7 series and SLUS 12 series. The question that I have and that we've been trying to discuss in the work group, but I wanted to get feedback from people here, is do people still see a need for supporting the older Red Hat 6 and SLUS 11 kernels in the community OFED? If there's a need, we'll look at how much work it is to do the backports. But as you move further in time, and go to the newer kernels, sometimes backporting from those very latest kernels to the very older kernels that are in the older distros becomes more difficult and may not even be possible. But does anybody have any input on that? Is Red Hat 6 and SLUS 11 still widely deployed enough that we should probably consider doing that? I'm seeing a nod.
I would say yes.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if anybody from Livermore is here, but our production stacks are still 6.
Okay, all right. So I'll take that feedback back to the EWG, and when we start working on that, we'll do the evaluation. Hopefully, we'll be able to add that support as well. So if you want to get involved with the EWG, if you're a new vendor that's developing new hardware and want to get that into the community OFED, et cetera, here's the various email lists. So there is a EWG specific email list that you can register for through OpenFabrics.org, and that's where the announcements come out for the meetings and the dial-in for the bridges. And then if you have code specifically that you want to get into the OFED package, like a user space library or whatnot, you can send email on that list to Vladimir from Mellanox, who is our release maintainer, and he's the one that puts together all the packages and actually creates the OFED tarballs. And then for general development in OFA, the Linux RDMA list, of course, is the place to send all of your kernel patches and discuss other user space stuff. And then there are other working groups that are focused, one on the OFI, the OFIWG email list, and there's an OFV one for extending verbs and doing additional additions to the verbs. And then there's a link there to the various maintainers and who's responsible for what pieces. So if you develop code and you want to send a patch to that maintainer, either a kernel or user space, that's where you find out who to send it to. And you can, anybody's welcome to participate in the EWG meetings. If you subscribe to the EWG list, that's where the announcements go out and where the bridge numbers are sent out. And then if you run into bugs in OFED, the best place to log them is in the OpenFabrics Bugzilla. And we, regularly review that as we're going through the OFED releases and try to get resolution to any problems that people have found. Questions? Okay, that's all I had. Thanks. Christoph.
Thought you were gonna get away.
I'm a bit surprised that you still support Red Hat 7.2 and stuff. Do you coordinate your changes with Red Hat?
What do you mean? So what we do is we typically will do the backports for the various versions of Red Hat. We tend to try and keep backports alive for the latest one and at least the one prior. So if the latest one is
okay, I know that, but the problem with Red Hat is they have intensive efforts to support InfiniBand natively on Red Hat 6 and Red Hat 7.
Correct.
If you try to provide something additional, then you are duplicating work and you are taking bug reports away from Red Hat that I wish the Red Hat would see.
Right.
That's the problem.
For a lot of use cases, and we actually recommend for probably most people that they probably can get away with and should just be using what's already in the distros.
Okay.
And it's only situations where, maybe there's a newer version of the core stuff that we've backported now. We're backporting to the Red Hat 7 or the Red Hat 6, that they have a need to get that newer thing that they may want to consider using the community OFED. Or if they have situations where, they want to ensure that the code that they're running has been run through the interop program and has been tested through the logo program.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you do a test with Red Hat 7.x and 6.x?
So I've thought about that. Could we use the distributions for the logo program instead? And the problem with that is then, first of all, which one do you pick? Do you pick Red Hat? Do you pick SLES? Red Hat and SLES are on totally different, schedules for when they release stuff. One of the benefits that we have with the community OFED is that since the UNH IOL can be using the early versions and the RCs as part of the debug events, they can find issues and it can get fed into the OFED package during the development. Whereas OpenFabrics doesn't have a relationship where they can get the early versions of Red Hat or SLES. So it would be more difficult, I think, if we did that. Then we'd have to choose which ones, or we'd have to have multiple events, one for SLES, one for Red Hat. And to this point, up to this point, we haven't decided to go that route.
Is there a cooperation with Red Hat going on with Red Hat 6 and 7 so that issues are cross-fed to Doug, for example?
Well, I believe for the Red Hat 6 series, if I recall from last year, I think Doug said that they've frozen their support in Red Hat 6, so they no longer will pull stuff back from newer kernels into Red Hat 6, so it's frozen. So, that may be a reason why you might want the community OFED stuff, because it does have the newer code.
Red Hat just finished extensive work on Red Hat 6.8 to report the newest features into Red Hat 6.8.
Well, maybe they changed their mind then. I remember last year he said that they had frozen their support.
They're going to take over,
I'm not 100% sure of that. Maybe the Red Hat guy can say that. Question?
Well, I have one question, and that's regarding to what I also mentioned in my talk yesterday, that when we have these bug fixes, earlier it used to be, and that confused me a lot, it used to be tarballs with certain names on them, and 116 of the libib verbs and so on, and they used to be different from the 116 inside OFED. Is that now so? I noticed that there were some of these had git tags to them, the one that hopefully, and that's my question, do you have now all that all the packages that have applied patches to them in OFED compared to the tarball version, do they have a Git tag in them so that we can see that they are different?
I'm not sure I'm 100% understanding your question. So, I mean, as far as the number of the OFED package corresponds to the base kernel that we start with.
Yes, that's fine, and that's an improvement over the other one.
And then,
the old one.
so we start with that base kernel, and then we add backport patches, right, to make it run on various distros. And then there are additional cherry-picked fixes for specific items in specific drivers and things like that are applied on top of that.
Yes, and my question is just, when you have these cherry pick the issues, it would be very good if it would be possible to see from the top level list of packages.
Yeah, so if you
included
go to the OpenFabrics website and you find the compat for the kernel stuff, if you find the compat RDMA Git tree, you can look at the Git log for that shows all of the patches and all of the changes that have gone into a specific.
Yes, and that was what I ended up doing. But I think when the one certain package is changed, it would be very good if the version reflects that it's not the base version, the 116 libriver version.
Yeah, so for each of the user
something.
space packages, they use their own numbering scheme. They don't
Yes.
say this is the package that goes with this version of OFED.
Yes, and that when you patch that, it will be very good if you add the Git tag to it so that it's possible to see from the base list of content in the OFED distribution that this particular sub module has been patched. That was kind of a very confusing for me when I did because I had to use a newer kernel for various reasons. So I was running on the latest Fedora, been running on the latest Fedora all along during the development of the Oracle HCI, and then I had to apply these patches all the time. And that caused me a lot of confusion and extra work.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I can link you up with Vladimir from Mellanox. He's the one that does all the mechanics and manages all the Git trees, so if you have any specific
But if we can do this in a way that it's easily visible, that this tarball version taken, which is what the Red Hat pulls, for instance, is different from the version that's included in the OFED build, that would kind of solve the problem.
Okay.
And you see it immediately.
All right, yeah,
having the Git tag in the end or something.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll take that feedback back. Question?
No, I'm Don Duto from Red Hat. So I'm the one who took over Doug's work in RHEL maintenance. So I can tell you, so I understand the timing issue you're talking about because we have our schedule and you take a snap of whoever's release or whatever and do your backports. I understand the timing issues and all that, but there's nothing stopping anyone from submitting a bug to RHEL saying, we've seen this bug, could you please backport it? Now we do have a process in that, we prioritize bugs and all that, and it may sit there longer than some people want, but more people complain, the priority rises pretty quick and all that. So my suggestion about what people are worried about, what Christoph is worried about, it's just, get the fixes into RHEL, post the BZ, post what you guys believe is the patch, and especially if the patch is upstream. As for updates to RHEL 6, 6.8 is going out any day now, and is been rebased to upstream 4.1. So trying to update the 4.7, I think you're going to be challenged.
Okay.
That'd be my feedback. So as much as people want you to do that, good luck. Okay.
Okay. So that might make it difficult to try and backport to it.
I can tell you right now, the next release is 7.3. I started doing that backport, and we're currently targeting to go all the way up to 4.6. So that update will be much easier for you because you'll just be 4.6 or 4.7, something like that. So that will be fairly trivial if you have to do that. But yeah, putting bug fixes into RHEL isn't hard. It's just a matter of it getting up high enough the priority to make that priority, what we call a kernel priority list.
Right.
Because that number is huge. Right? I can tell you right now for L7, it's 700 in just the IB stack. Okay, so.
Okay.
And I'm looking at them. So
Okay, thanks. More questions?
I have a question on licensing.
Yes.
So OFED is dual licensed,
Correct.
BSD and GPL. So you keep talking about picking up kernel changes. So what happens if that kernel changes GPL only? You're not going to pick up. That's the story.
Okay, so all of the code that's in the Linux Infiniman drivers directory and all the stuff that now Doug has taken over has been submitted under the dual BSD GPL license, okay? And we went through this in gory detail over the last year. And so even though we take the code from the upstream tree, the upstream kernel.org git tree, that does not invalidate that that code is still dual licensed, right? And so, you know, we try to make sure that, you know, we're careful to make sure that at least the base kernel code that we're taking from kernel.org contains all of the license files that say dual license BSD GPL. And if you run into a situation where you find something that's not driver that's not, let us know, because we've actually had a couple instances over the last year where there was I think it was the Vago Rocky driver initially was submitted under only GPL, but they wanted to be in the OFED package, and they actually went back and resubmitted under you know, the dual license so that we could do that. Okay, thanks.